The crystal glass shattered against the marble floor, and in the cold silence that followed, Reginald Whitfield opened the front door and looked at his wife. 8 months pregnant, one hand on the banister, one hand on her unborn son. "Get out of my house," he said.
I had to be sure before
"Take
I
that
said
disgrace
anything.
you call a son and get out." She did not scream.
It's true about
She did
David
not
and the
beg.
money.
She picked up 3 things on her way
The
out
DNA
the door:
test
her
confirms your
phone,
claim.
her purse,
We can move
and a
forward with
baby
the
name
estate
book.
transfer
Because
immediately.
somewhere in the part of her that he had never managed to reach, she already knew something he did not. The truth was coming, and when it arrived, it would not just free her. It would destroy everything he had spent 30 years building. Stay with us, because this story is not about a woman who was broken. It is about a woman who was thrown back into herself and what she built when she got there. Lesson statement: sometimes the person who throws you out is actually throwing you forward toward the life you were always supposed to be living. Meaning of the story: this is a story about what happens when a woman stops shrinking to fit inside someone else's design. It is about the quiet, unglamorous, deeply human work of reclaiming yourself after you have spent years making yourself smaller. Caroline's journey will remind you that dignity is not something that can be taken from you. It can only be set down, and you can always pick it back up. If this story moved something in you or reminded you of your own strength, or someone you love who needed to hear exactly this, hit the like button right now. Leave a comment below and tell us, what was the moment in your own life when you finally chose yourself? Share this story with someone who needs it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join our community, because every week we bring you stories exactly like this one. Stories about real courage, real survival, real second chances.
The crystal whiskey glass hit the Italian marble floor and shattered into 40 pieces. Caroline Whitfield counted them later. She did not know why she counted them. She just did. The sound came first, sharp, final, like a period at the end of a sentence that had been building for a very long time. Then came the voice. "Get out of my house." Reginald Whitfield stood in the center of the grand foyer of their 11,000 square foot home in Scottsdale, Arizona. He was 54 years old. He wore his gray dress shirt, open at the collar. His dark eyes were completely steady. He did not look angry. That was the thing Caroline would think about later. He did not look angry at all. He looked relieved. "Reg?" Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "What are you doing?" "Get out of my house," he said again. "Take that disgrace you call a son and get out." Caroline stood at the base of the curved staircase. She was 31 years old and 8 months pregnant. One hand had found the banister without her telling it to. The other was pressed flat against her stomach, against Noah. She was wearing the cream cashmere robe Reginald had bought her in Milan 2 Christmases ago. She had reached for it automatically that evening because it was warm, because she had not yet learned to stop reaching for things that came from him. The November air was cold outside. She could feel it from where she stood. He had opened the front door. The desert night came in cold and dark and completely indifferent to what was happening in this foyer. "This isn't what it looks like," she said. The words came out wrong. She knew that immediately. She was not the one who needed to say those words tonight. Reg almost smiled. "Almost. I know exactly what it looks like," he said. "I've known for a while." The fight had started over a name. 40 minutes earlier, they had been sitting at the kitchen island, baby name books open between them, the granite counter cool under Caroline's forearms, the overhead lights warm and domestic and completely ordinary. They had been discussing names for a boy. Caroline had liked the name Noah since she was a girl. She had mentioned it in the 6th month, and Reg had nodded without much reaction. That evening, she brought it up again. She said she thought Noah felt right. She said she wanted to decide before the hospital. Reg's phone buzzed on the counter between them. He turned it face down. One quick motion. Practiced. Caroline noticed. She had been noticing things like that for 7 months. A half-second too long on something across the room. A door closing just before she could see who was on the other end of a call. The specific way he said he was tired when she asked about his day. She had told herself she was hormonal, sensitive, seeing patterns in static. She was not. "Can I see your phone?" she asked. Her voice was completely even. She asked the way you ask, when you already know the answer, but need to hear it said out loud. Reg was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then he pushed back from the island. He stood up slowly, and something shifted in his face that Carolyn had never seen in 4 years of marriage. It was not anger, it was calculation, like a man who had been waiting for permission. "You want to know what's on my phone," he said. "Fine, let me tell you what I already know about you." What followed was 12 minutes that Caroline would spend years trying to describe and never quite manage. He did not yell, not at first. He enumerated. He listed dates, incidents, conversations. Things she had said to her mother on the phone 3 months ago. Things she had told Delia in confidence at dinner last spring. Small things she had done that she did not even remember, now cited back to her, with a precision that made the room feel very cold. And woven through all of it, delivered with the flat certainty of a man reading from a prepared document, was the accusation. The baby was not his. "I had you tested, Caroline," he said. "I had someone look into things. That child is not mine." She heard herself ask what he meant. Her voice was completely steady. She was surprised by that. He said he meant exactly what he said. He said his lawyer had advised him not to do this tonight. He said he did it anyway because he wanted her to understand something clearly. He was not the fool she took him for. And then, as if punctuating the end of a business meeting, he walked to the front door and opened it. "Get out of my house," he said, "with that disgrace you call a son." The November air came through the open door. Caroline looked at the darkness outside. She looked at the broken glass on the marble floor. She looked at her husband's face, at the certainty there, at the relief she now saw clearly for the first time. She understood something in the deepest part of her stomach, something that would take months to fully rise to the surface. He had planned this. Not tonight, specifically, not this argument, but this moment, this outcome. He had been moving toward it for a long time. She picked up 3 things on her way out: her phone from the entry table, her purse from the hook beside the door, and the baby name book from the kitchen island. She did not know why she took the baby name book. She reached for it without deciding to. Later she would understand. She took it because Noah was still her son, regardless of what Reg said, and she refused to let the name become something poisoned. She walked out the door. She walked to her car in the driveway. She got in. She closed the door. She put her hands on the steering wheel. She sat there for 6 minutes. The heat ran. The clock on the dashboard ticked. The desert dark sat outside the windows, enormous and unconcerned. She did not call anyone. She did not unlock her phone. She did not cry. She just breathed. In through her nose, slowly, until her lungs were full. Out through her mouth, slowly, until they were empty again. She had learned this in a prenatal yoga class she attended alone because Reg was always traveling on Tuesday evenings. She breathed. She counted the breaths. She pressed one hand against Noah, who moved in the slow rolling way he moved at night, unhurried and unaware. After 6 minutes, she turned on the headlights. She backed out of the driveway. She drove. The desert highway was dark and long and completely empty at 11:15 on a Thursday night in November. She drove with the radio off, one hand on the wheel, one hand on her stomach. No internal narration, no planning, just the road and the headlights and the hum of the engine. She was 27 minutes from her mother's house on the east side of Scottsdale. Halfway there, her phone buzzed in the passenger seat. She did not reach for it. When she stopped at a red light 4 minutes later, she glanced down. The text was from a number she did not recognize. No name, no context, just 4 words on the screen. He's done this before. Caroline stared at it for the length of the red light. Then the light changed. She put her eyes back on the road. She drove the rest of the way to her mother's house in complete silence. Margot Haynes opened the front door before Caroline could knock. She was 62 years old, and she had been awake. Her reading glasses were pushed up on her head. She was wearing the blue terrycloth robe she had owned for 11 years. The kitchen light was on behind her. She looked at her daughter's face. She looked at the cream cashmere robe and the purse and the baby name book tucked under Caroline's arm. She looked at the hand pressed flat against the round belly. She did not ask any question. She stepped back and held the door open wider. "Come in," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." Caroline sat at the kitchen table in the house where she had grown up. The same table where she had done homework and eaten birthday breakfasts and cried after her first real breakup at 19 years old. The same yellow walls. The vanilla candle burning on the windowsill. The shaking started. Not crying, something deeper. The tremor that comes before crying, when the body is processing what the mind has not caught up to yet. Her hands on the table were moving slightly, as if conducting something she could not hear. Margot sat across from her with 2 mugs and waited. Margot had always been the kind of woman who understood that some things need to arrive in their own time. When Caroline finally spoke, it came out in the wrong order. The phone buzzing, the test he claimed to have run, the door swinging open, the broken glass, the baby name book in the passenger seat. Margot listened to all of it. Her face was very still, and Caroline, watching her mother's stillness, felt the first cold finger of real unease, because Margot was not surprised. "Mom," Caroline said. "Did you know something?" Margot set down her mug. She looked at her daughter for a long moment. "I didn't know," she said finally. "I suspected. There's a difference." The conversation that followed was the one they should have had 2 years ago. Both women knew it. Margot had met Reg 3 times before the wedding. She had said, carefully, that he reminded her of certain men she had known when she was young. Men who were generous with their resources and precise with their control. Men who made you feel chosen in a way that was intoxicating until you realized being chosen by them was also being owned by them. Caroline had heard this as jealousy, as the specific friction of a recently widowed mother watching her daughter fall in love with a wealthy, older man. She had not heard it as the warning it was. Now, sitting in the kitchen that smelled of chamomile tea and vanilla, in the particular safety of her childhood home, Caroline began the process of inventory. Not of what Reg had done tonight, of what she had known and chosen not to examine. God, I was so stupid. The signs were all there, not hidden signs, right in front of me signs. I just kept deciding they meant something else. She was not a stupid woman. She knew that about herself with the same clarity she knew her own name. She had been a financial analyst before this marriage. She had spent 8 years evaluating risk for a living. She was good at seeing what other people missed, which made it worse somehow. The text message was still on her phone. She showed it to her mother. 4 words. "He's done this before." Margot read it twice. She set the phone down on the table between them and said nothing. Neither woman slept that night. By morning, Caroline had a list. She did not write it down. She kept it in her head the way you keep things that are too damaging to exist on paper. The list had 9 items. She got to 9 and stopped counting. 9 was already too many. Item 1. The prenuptial agreement Reg had presented 1 week before the wedding. She had consulted a divorce attorney named Fletcher Odom, who told her the terms were aggressive but survivable. There was an infidelity clause protecting her assets. There was, he had noted, a mirror clause as well. She had signed it because she was in love, and love makes you terrible at reading contracts. Item 2. The travel. In the first year of their marriage, Reg traveled for work the way successful men do. Frequently, with explanations. In the second year, the explanations grew shorter. By the third year, he simply told her when he was leaving and when he would return. She had reframed this as the comfortable shorthand of a settled marriage. It was not that. Item 3. Vivian Cross. Reg's personal assistant, 41 years old, elegant and efficient, and always slightly too informed about Caroline's schedule for it to feel coincidental. Caroline had raised this once in the second year of their marriage. Reg had laughed, not unkindly. He said she was imagining things. She had believed him. She had apologized. She had stopped mentioning Vivian Cross entirely. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. I knew it then, and I convinced myself out of it. She was not angry at herself for this, or she was trying not to be. She knew that what happened to her happened to women who were intelligent and accomplished and perceptive. She knew the architecture of it, the way each small reassurance was reasonable in isolation, the way the pattern only revealed itself when enough time had passed. But knowing the architecture did not make standing inside the collapsed building any less painful. By mid-morning, 2 things happened. First, Caroline called Dr. Anita Prescott's office. Dr. Prescott had been her OBGYN for 6 years. Through 2 early miscarriages, through the cautious hope of this pregnancy, Caroline left a message asking specifically about her prenatal records, whether anyone had requested access to them, and when. The second thing was Delia. Delia Forsyth picked up on the first ring, because Delia always picked up on the first ring, for 22 years, through 2 breakups and 1 failed business venture, and a move across the country, and now this. He kicked you out, Delia said. Not a question. Yes. 8 months pregnant. Yes. There was a pause, short. The specific pause of someone who has been holding something in for a long time. Honey, Delia said, I have been biting my tongue for 3 years. Tell me everything. Caroline told her everything. Delia listened the way she always listened, which was completely and without interrupting. When Caroline finished, there was another pause, longer this time. Okay, Delia said. I'm coming over. You don't have to. I'm coming over. She arrived 40 minutes later with 3 bags of groceries and the specific energy of a woman who has decided that a crisis requires food and presence and no further discussion of whether help is wanted. She set the groceries on Margot's kitchen counter. She turned around and looked at Caroline. I need to tell you something, she said, and I need you to know that I have been arguing with myself about whether to say it since August of last year. Caroline waited. I saw Vivian Cross at the 4 Seasons in Phoenix 14 months ago. Delia's voice was careful, precise, like she had rehearsed it. I wasn't going to tell you because I didn't know what I saw, and I didn't want to blow up your marriage over a lunch. A lunch. In a corner booth, very private, his hand on hers. The kitchen was quiet. The vanilla candle on the windowsill had burned down while they slept, and the wick had gone out. Margot was in the backyard. A hummingbird visited the feeder at the fence. The ordinary November morning continued its business. Somewhere along the way, I became invisible. Not to them, to myself. I stopped trusting what I saw because it was easier than dealing with what I saw. Why are you telling me now? Carolyn asked. Because what he did to you 2 nights ago, Delia said, throwing you out like that, 8 months pregnant, using that baby as ammunition. That is not a man having an affair. That is a man executing a plan. And you need every piece of information you can get. Caroline nodded slowly. She was not angry at Delia. She understood the calculation Delia had made 14 months ago. She had made similar calculations herself, over and over, about things she had seen, but there was a loneliness in it. The discovery that even the people who loved you had been managing your reality, deciding what you needed to know and what you could be protected from. She was tired of being managed. Dr. Prescott's office called back at 11:40 that morning. The nurse's voice was carefully neutral. She said the doctor would like to speak with Caroline directly, as soon as possible, today, if she could manage it. Caroline looked at her mother across the kitchen. "I can manage it," she said. The medical office smelled of antiseptic and the specific artificial lavender of air freshener that Caroline associated with waiting rooms and difficult news. Dr. Anita Prescott was 50 years old. She had short silver hair and wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She had delivered hard information to patients before. Caroline had seen her do it. She was very good at it. The measured quality of her language when she closed the office door was not good. Someone had requested Caroline's prenatal records. The request had come through Reginald Whitfield's estate attorney 6 weeks ago. It cited legal preparation for a civil matter. The documentation was in order. Every piece of it. The routing was correct. The authorization language was technically sound. Everything was exactly as it should be if this had been a legitimate request from a legitimate party with legitimate standing. The records had not been released. Dr. Prescott had flagged the request and held it pending Caroline's knowledge and consent, which was within her professional authority and which she had exercised because something about the request felt wrong in a way she could not immediately name. But the infrastructure was built. Someone had prepared for this. This was not a reaction. This was a strategy. The explosion in the foyer, the whiskey glass, the open door, none of it was impulse. It was a performance delivered on a timeline Reg had chosen. Caroline sat very still in the doctor's office. She was wearing maternity jeans and a blue sweater. Her hair was in a ponytail because she had not had the interior resources to think about her hair that morning. "How long ago did you say the request came in?" she asked. 6 weeks. 6 weeks ago, Caroline had been at 32 weeks of pregnancy. She and Reg had been attending a charity dinner. She had worn a green dress. He had held her hand on the way in and said she looked beautiful. 6 weeks ago, he was already building the legal architecture for this. She pressed her hand against her stomach, against Noah. "If the records had been released," she said, "what could they have been used for?" Dr. Prescott answered carefully. The prenatal records contained timeline information, conception dates, early appointment documentation. A man with the right attorney could use them to construct a timeline argument, to establish a window during which he would claim Caroline had been with another man. It was not proof of anything, but it was noise. It was the kind of thing that created complexity in proceedings that cost time and money to sort through, that muddied clear water while other things moved beneath the surface. "He needed the noise," Caroline said quietly. "I'm sorry?" "He needed something to make the paternity question look credible, long enough for the financial picture to be restructured. The records would have helped with that." She paused. "He didn't need to win the argument. He just needed it to take long enough." Dr. Prescott looked at her for a moment over the reading glasses. "You should talk to an attorney today," she said. "I have one in mind. I deserved better than this. My child deserves better. And the truth is going to come out whether Reg wants it to or not." Fletcher Odom's law firm was on the north side of Scottsdale. Caroline had consulted him briefly before the wedding, when she first reviewed the prenuptial agreement. She had not spoken to him in 4 years. She did not have an appointment. She sat in the waiting room for 45 minutes. The chairs were upholstered in a sensible gray fabric. There was a fish tank in the corner, large and quietly gurgling, with 3 orange fish doing their slow, deliberate circuits. The receptionist brought Caroline water without being asked. A young associate passed through twice, and both times did not quite manage to not look at the pregnant woman sitting alone with her hands folded on top of her belly and her face completely still. Caroline sat. She breathed. She watched the fish. She was not thinking about strategy. She was not planning. She was doing the thing she had learned to do in the 6 minutes in the driveway last night. She was simply being present in the moment before the next moment. Fletcher came out himself. He was 47 years old and looked 60, in the specific way that divorce attorneys who have absorbed 30 years of other people's worst days look 60. He was methodical and contained in the way of good attorneys. He took her back to his office. He closed the door. He asked her to tell him everything from the beginning. She told him everything from the beginning. He listened without expression. He reviewed the prenuptial agreement she had photographed on her phone. He read the text from the unknown number. He looked at the photo of the prenatal records request. He made notes in small, precise handwriting that filled 3 pages. When she finished, he set down his pen. "I have 2 questions," he said. She nodded. "Do you know who sent the text?" "No." "Do you have any knowledge of Reginald Whitfield's actual current financial situation? Not the public presentation, the actual numbers." Caroline was quiet for a moment, because she was a financial analyst before this marriage. And in 7 months of a high-risk pregnancy that had kept her home a great deal, she had had significant time to think, and she had noticed things, not suspicions. Facts, specific numbers, and publicly available documents that did not reconcile with other publicly available documents. Things she had noticed and filed away, and did not examine further because examining them would have required her to act on what she found. "I think his empire has a problem," she said carefully. "I don't know yet what kind." Fletcher was completely still for a moment. Then he said, "Start remembering everything you can. Write nothing down yet. Just remember." He told her he would file a motion for temporary support by end of day. He told her she needed to stay somewhere safe and document her location. He told her to send any further communication from Reg directly to him. She thanked him and stood to leave. At the door, she turned back. "Fletcher, when I came to see you before the wedding about the prenuptial agreement." She paused. "You said there was a mirror clause, an infidelity clause that could, work against him as well as against me." "That's correct." "If he made a false accusation of infidelity in a legal filing, knowing it was false." Fletcher looked at her for a long moment. "That would be a very different kind of problem for him," he said. Caroline nodded. She went home to her mother's house. That evening, sitting on Margot's guest bed with her laptop, she pulled Reginald Whitfield's publicly filed business records and began reading. She was methodical about it. She moved through the documents the way she used to move through financial analyses at work, systematically, without jumping to conclusions, following the numbers wherever they led. 2 hours in, she found the gap. It was in a filing from 18 months ago. A restructuring document for an entity called Meridian Holdings. On its face, it was entirely ordinary. A real estate portfolio, restructuring of the kind that large commercial developers performed regularly. But there was a number that did not add up. A liability figure that was inconsistent with the asset values listed 3 paragraphs earlier. A small inconsistency. The kind that could be a clerical error or could be the edge of something larger. She took a screenshot. She sent it to Fletcher with one line. Look at the Meridian Holdings, filing from 18 months ago. Then she closed the laptop, turned off the light, and lay in the dark in her mother's guest room with her hand on her stomach and Noah moving slowly and her mind completely, precisely awake. Delia arrived the next morning with a second round of groceries and a list of questions she had clearly been composing in her head since the phone call 2 days ago. She and Caroline sat on Margot's back porch in the November morning. The desert air was cool and thin. The neighbor's cat was doing its slow territorial inspection of the fence line. Somewhere down the street, someone was running a leaf blower. The ordinary world, continuing its business. Delia wrapped both hands around her mug. She looked at Caroline with the expression she used when she had made a decision and was now simply following through on it. I need to tell you the rest of it, she said. The rest of the 4 seasons. Yes. She had not just seen Reg and Vivian at lunch. She had seen them leave together. She had watched from across the lobby, feeling sick and certain and completely paralyzed by the question of what to do with what she was seeing. She had called Caroline 3 times that week and hung up before the call connected. She had drafted and deleted a text message 17 times. She had ultimately decided that she was not certain enough to destroy a marriage and a pregnancy on what might have been, technically, a business lunch with a hand placed briefly on a colleague's. She had been wrong. I should have told you, Delia said. You were trying to protect me. I was trying to protect myself, Delia said, from being the person who told you. I need to be honest about that. Caroline looked at her oldest friend across the porch table, at this woman who had known her since they were 9 years old and sharing a locker in the 4th grade, who had held her hand at both miscarriages, who was here right now, on this porch, having the harder version of the conversation instead of the easier one. Thank you for telling me now, Caroline said. The hardest part is admitting I knew all along, not the affair specifically. The shape of the thing, the way he managed information, the way he controlled what I knew. I felt the shape of it, and I kept my hand away from it because touching it meant I had to do something about it. Delia refilled their mugs from the pot on the table. What happens now? She asked. Fletcher files a motion today, and I think someone is going to call me who knows the financial side of this. As if the morning had been listening, Caroline's phone rang at 11:30. She looked at the screen. Sutton Whitfield, Reg's son. She had not spoken to Sutton since before the expulsion. They had maintained a carefully cordial relationship for 4 years. Not cold, exactly, but the relationship of 2 people who had both decided to keep a certain amount of distance for reasons neither of them had named out loud. I need to meet with you, Sutton said. His voice was tight, controlled, like someone trying to sound calmer than he was. Not at my dad's place. Somewhere neutral. Okay, Caroline said. When? Today, if you can. They met at a coffee shop in Tempe. Sutton was already there when Caroline arrived. He was 28 years old and had his father's jaw and none of his father's calculation. He looked like he had not slept. He looked at Caroline's belly when she came through the door, and then quickly at her face, and then at the table. There was guilt in that sequence of looks. Real guilt. She sat across from him. I didn't know he was going to do it this way, Sutton said without preamble. I knew something was happening legally. I knew there were filings being prepared. I did not know he was going to wait until 8 months. What do you know, Sutton? He knew a great deal. He knew that Reginald Whitfield had been in serious financial difficulty for 14 months. Not visible difficulty, the kind that lived in private restructuring documents and carefully managed appearances, and debt that had been rolled from one entity into another with enough complexity to avoid immediate scrutiny. Meridian Holdings was the center of it. Reg had over-leveraged on 3 major commercial real estate deals in 2022. When the market shifted, the leverage became untenable. He had created Meridian as a restructuring vehicle and routed the problem debt through it. He had been managing the shortfall through a combination of private accounts and a silent partnership that was, at minimum, ethically questionable. And the prenuptial agreement was the key. Under normal divorce proceedings, Caroline would have significant claims against the marital estate, including assets accumulated during the marriage. But the prenuptial agreement contained specific language, the infidelity clause. If Reg could establish that Caroline had been unfaithful, the agreement restructured entirely in his favor. His attorneys could argue the marriage had been founded on fraud. The settlement would be dramatically reduced, but there was a mirror clause, and Reg knew it. So he needed something else. He needed to dispute paternity, to claim the child was not his, to allege that Caroline had been with another man during the marriage, not to win the argument, just to cloud it, just to create enough complexity that the financial picture could be repositioned while the courts sorted through the noise. He's using the pregnancy as a legal instrument, Sutton said. His voice was completely flat. He's not angry about paternity. He is terrified of what a proper financial audit would find. Carolyn looked at Reg's son across the table, at this young man who had grown up watching his father manage and calculate and build, who had spent 28 years deciding what he owed his father and what he owed the truth. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Sutton looked at his coffee cup for a long moment. "Because my mother did her 20 years, he said quietly, "and nobody told her anything either." Caroline drove back to her mother's house with her hands steady on the wheel and her mind moving very fast through everything Sutton had told her. She was 2 minutes from Margot Street when her phone rang through the car speakers. Warren Tate. She recognized the name. She had met him twice at company events. Reggie's business partner of 19 years, 61 years old. A man built from the same era of self-made ambition as Reg, but with what had always seemed to Caroline like a different internal architecture. His voice when he spoke was quiet, the specific quietness of someone calling from a room where they were not certain they were alone. "Caroline Yata Sikrain," he said, "I think you need to know that Reg is moving money, right now, today, and I cannot be part of this anymore." Warren Tate arrived at Fletcher Odom's office the following morning at 8 o'clock. He was 61 years old and carried himself with the particular gravity of a man who had made a decision and was now simply executing it. He wore a dark suit. He carried a briefcase. He looked like what he was, a serious man about to do a serious thing. Inside the briefcase was a thumb drive. He set it on Fletcher's desk without ceremony. "This is everything I have legal access to," he said. "Copies of internal filings, restructuring documents, the Meridian Holdings accounting as it actually appears, not as it appears in the public record, and documentation of the Nevada entity." Fletcher picked up the drive. He did not open his expression. "Tell me about the Nevada entity," he said. The Nevada Holding Company had been registered 18 months ago under a name that was not Reginald Whitfield. The controlling party, however, was Reginald Whitfield. The entity's purpose was to receive asset transfers from the Whitfield Properties portfolio in the event of certain legal proceedings. The asset transfer had begun the day after Reg threw Caroline out of the house. "He started moving the money the morning after," Warren said. 24 hours after the confrontation. While knowing the divorce filing was coming, Fletcher said, while knowing and preparing for it, yes, for at least 6 weeks. Caroline sat in the chair across from Fletcher's desk. Her hands were flat on the armrests. Noah shifted inside her, the slow morning movement she had learned to recognize. She breathed. Fraudulent transfer, Fletcher said. Not a question. That would be the legal characterization, yes, Warren said. We file for an injunction today, Fletcher said. He was already reaching for his notepad. Before end of business, we freeze the transfer. Caroline looked at Warren Tate across the office, at this man who had been Reg's partner for 19 years, who had presumably covered for him, accommodated him, worked alongside him through the various ethical accommodations that building an empire sometimes required. Warren, she said, why now? He was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands on the arms of his chair. Because he's using a child, Warren said. I have covered for a lot of things over a lot of years. I will not cover for that. The injunction was filed by 4 that afternoon. Fletcher called Caroline at 4:30 to confirm it. She was sitting in the guest bathroom at her mother's house at that moment, because the guest bathroom was the one room in the house she could be certain she was alone in, and she needed to be alone for a few minutes. She was sitting on the closed lid of the toilet with her back against the tank and her feet on the cool tile floor, the cold of the tile through her socks, the faint smell of the lavender soap her mother kept on the sink, the sound of Fletcher's voice on the phone, calm and methodical, telling her the injunction had been accepted and the asset transfer was frozen, pending review. He never loved me. He loved what I represented, the young wife, the clean history, the second chance narrative. I was a chapter in his story. I let that become my whole story. She was crying, she noticed. Very quietly. She had not noticed when it started. She sat on the edge of the bathtub in her mother's guest bathroom and let it happen. She did not try to stop it or redirect it or tell herself she was stronger than this. She was strong enough to let it happen and then stop. It took about 4 minutes. She turned on the cold water at the sink. She splashed her face twice. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. She looked tired. She looked 31 years old and 8 months pregnant and tired in the specific way of someone who has been working very hard at something for a very long time without being able to name what they were working at. She also looked, she thought, like someone who had just made a decision without realizing she had been making it. She turned off the water. She dried her hands. She walked back out to the kitchen where Margot was making soup that smelled of garlic and thyme. Starting over feels impossible, but staying was never even an option. The door was opened from the outside. Reggie appeared at Margot's house at 6:30 that evening, his car in the driveway, his posture composed. The specific composed fury of a man who was not accustomed to being outmaneuvered and was working very hard not to let that show. Margot did not open the door. She spoke to him through the intercom that Caroline had installed for her 2 years ago, a fact Reg had apparently not retained. Her voice through the speaker was the most gracious, controlled thing Caroline had ever heard. Reginald, Margot said. Caroline's attorney has advised her not to speak with you directly. I suggest you contact him. Have a good evening. There was a silence on the other end of the intercom, then the sound of footsteps on the front walk. Caroline watched through the front window. Reg stood beside his car for a moment. He looked at the house. His face was doing something she recognized now as calculation rather than emotion. He got in the car. He sat in the driveway for 7 minutes. Then he backed out and drove away. Mirror. Technique. The midnight organizing. That night, unable to sleep at 11, Caroline reorganized her mother's entire linen closet. She pulled every towel and sheet from the shelves and refolded them with precise, focused attention, stacked the washcloths by color, aligned the edges with the shelf edge exactly. Her hands needed something concrete. Her mind needed something small enough to finish. The text conversation with the unknown number lasted 3 messages. Caroline, at 2 in the morning. Who are you? The reply came in under 2 minutes. Someone who was where you are. His first wife. My name is Patricia. Caroline sat up in the dark guest room with her phone screen the only light. Noah was still. The house was completely quiet. She typed, "Can we talk?" The response, "Yes, call me whenever you're ready." She called at 9 the next morning. Patricia Ellerman Whitfield was 53 years old and lived in Flagstaff, 3 hours north of Scottsdale, in a house she owned outright and had purchased with money she fought very hard to get and never fully recovered from the fight of getting it. Her voice was the voice of a woman who had moved through a fire. Not unscathed, but clear. She spoke without self-pity and with precise, organized detail. She remembered dates, she remembered amounts. She had been keeping these facts organized in her mind for 20 years, the way you keep things you might need to use someday. He did the same thing to me, she said. Different play, same director. Her version was this. 20 years ago, during the divorce proceedings, Reg had accused her of infidelity. There was no other man. There had never been another man. The accusation was designed to destabilize her during settlement negotiations, to provide something for his attorneys to create noise around, while the real financial argument was being handled quietly in his favor. It had partially worked. Patricia had gotten less than she should have. He had gotten more than he deserved. Sutton had been 5 years old and had spent the next decade watching his father maintain the narrative of the wronged husband. Did you fight it? Caroline asked. I fought everything I could fight with what I could afford to fight with, Patricia said. I didn't have a Warren Tate. Outside Margot's kitchen window, the November sky was doing its thin winter work, pale blue and patient. Patricia, Caroline said, who told you about me? Who gave you my number? A brief pause. Vivian Cross, Patricia said. Caroline was quiet for a moment. Vivian Cross, the personal assistant, the woman Caroline had spent 4 years carefully not confronting, who had been at Reg's side for 11 years, who had been the subject of Delia's admission and Caroline's long-suppressed suspicion in an argument in the 2nd year of the marriage that Reg had laughed away. Vivian Cross had contacted Patricia Ellerman Whitfield to warn Caroline Whitfield either this was a trap or Vivian had reached a limit. The hardest part is admitting I knew all along. But knowing something and surviving it are different skills entirely. I am learning the second one right now, in real time. Caroline asked to meet Vivian in person. Patricia said she would arrange it. The meeting happened 2 days later at a coffee shop in Chandler. Neutral ground. Neither woman's territory. Vivian arrived exactly on time, which was the kind of thing Caroline had always noticed about her and now understood differently. She was 41 years old. She was dressed professionally. Her posture was the careful composure of a woman who had spent 11 years managing other people's problems and had taken 1 day off from it. She looked at Caroline across the table. You look better than I expected, she said. Thank you. I feel terrible. Yes, Vivian said. That's appropriate. What Vivian had brought was not documentation. She was not Warren Tate. She did not have access to the kind of records that translated into courtroom exhibits. What she had was proximity, 11 years of it. She knew which calls were taken in private. She knew which trips had two separate itineraries filed in two separate systems. She knew which financial conversations ended the moment she entered the room, not because she was untrustworthy, but because she knew too much to be safe. She could not testify to everything, but she could testify to the pattern. She could testify to the architecture of a man who built his personal life with the same methodology he built his business empire, controlled information, managed exposure, contingency planning for every possible outcome, including this one. He planned for this specifically? Caroline asked. He began preparing for a divorce, filing approximately 8 months ago, Vivian said, before you were pregnant. Caroline absorbed this. He had been preparing for the end of their marriage, before the pregnancy that he was now using as his primary legal argument. Why are you doing this? Caroline asked. After 11 years. Vivian looked at her coffee cup, then at Caroline's belly, then at her own hands. I have a nephew, she said. He's 8 months old, same age as Noah will be. She paused. I watched Reg look at the information about your pregnancy and decide it was useful. I watched him decide what to do with it, and I thought about my nephew. Another pause. I've been useful to a lot of things I shouldn't have been useful to. I'm done. 3 days later, Reg's attorney filed a motion contesting the injunction. In the same filing, they submitted what they claimed was photographic evidence of Caroline's infidelity. A set of photographs taken by a private investigator. A woman matching Caroline's description meeting a man at a hotel in North Scottsdale in August. The woman was Caroline. The man was Fletcher Odom. The meeting had been a consultation about the prenuptial agreement, conducted 9 months before any divorce filing, at a hotel coffee bar adjacent to Fletcher's office building, where he regularly met clients for initial consultations. Fletcher looked at the photographs and was, briefly, extremely still. Then he said, "This is what he does. He creates complexity. We simplify. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. I know what this is." The DNA test results arrived in Fletcher's office on a Thursday morning, delivered by Red's attorney as part of the continuing court filing. Fletcher called Caroline at 9:15. His voice was its usual measured quality, controlled and careful. "The DNA results have been formally submitted," he said. "I think you should come in." She was at his office by 10. She sat in the chair across from his desk. She was wearing a gray sweater, and her hair was down because she had taken the time that morning. She had not been certain why she took the time. Now she was. She had known, somewhere in the part of her that was very quiet and very certain, that today was going to matter. Fletcher slid the document across the desk. She picked it up. She read the finding. The technical language, the statistical language, the specific percentages that exist to render biological reality undeniable. Reginald Whitfield, confirmed biological father. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. She read it again. She folded the document along its original crease. She set it on Fletcher's desk with the same care she would use for something fragile. He knew, she said. Fletcher waited. He already had this result before he opened that door. He said so. I had you tested. He had the test. He had these results. He knew Noah was his son, and he opened that door anyway. The room was completely quiet. The clock on Fletcher's desk ticked. Outside, Scottsdale was doing its December business. Traffic and tourists and the complete indifference of a city that did not know what was happening in this office. He knew. He knew the whole time. This was never about paternity. This was about leverage. The accusation was the instrument, not the conclusion. What does this do to his case? Caroline asked. Fletcher was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone assembling several things simultaneously. A man who submits DNA, evidence he knows, confirms paternity while simultaneously claiming publicly and in legal filings that the child is not his is not making a legal argument, Fletcher said. He is committing perjury in the public record. Combined with the fraudulent transfer documentation Warren provided, and Vivian's formal willingness to testify, and the Meridian Holdings irregularities, this is no longer a contested divorce proceeding. This is potential criminal exposure. Caroline nodded slowly. She had passed through crying somewhere around 4 a.m, 2 days before, alone in her mother's guest room, with the house silent around her. She had cried in the specific way of someone releasing something they had been holding for a very long time. And she had come out the other side of it into something quieter, something more permanent. She was not in the crying part anymore. "What do we do next?" she asked. 3 things happened in the days following. The first, Reg's attorney requested a settlement conference. The tone had shifted. Not dramatically, subtly, the way a negotiation shifts when one party recalculates what they're actually holding. The aggressiveness had receded. The second, Sutton called. "He asked me to call you," Sutton said. His voice was careful. "I'm calling to tell you I'm not going to do that." A pause. "Sutton," Caroline said. "Thank you." "Caroline," his voice was quieter, "I'm sorry it took me this long to be in your corner. I should have been there sooner." She accepted this. She meant it. The third thing was smaller. She was sitting on Margot's back porch in the December sun, the desert doing its winter warmth, which was a strange and genuine kindness. She had the baby name book in her lap. She had been carrying it since the night she left. In her purse, then in the overnight bag her mother had helped her pack, then on the bedside table in the guest room. She had not opened it. She opened it now. She turned to the page she had bookmarked in the summer. The N section. Noah. She had written small pencil notes beside it. The meaning she had looked up. The variations. A small asterisk she had put there in July for a reason she no longer remembered. Her handwriting. Her choice. Before it was theirs, it was hers. His name was mine before it was ours. I chose it. It stays. She closed the book. She held it in her lap for a long time in the December sun. The sparrow landed on the fence post at the end of the yard. It sat there for a moment, looking at nothing in particular, doing its small sparrow business. Then it left. Starting over feels impossible, and starting over is exactly what I am doing, and those 2 things are both true at the same time. I am learning to hold both of them. The settlement conference was requested for the following week. Caroline asked Fletcher what to expect. "An offer," he said, "substantially different from their initial position." "How different?" "Enough that they're hoping you'll take it." "Will I take it?" "That depends entirely on what it contains." Noah Whitfield arrived at 6:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in December. The delivery room had the particular controlled fluorescence of all delivery rooms. It smelled of antiseptic and the specific human smell of effort and the faint plastic smell of the equipment. The sounds were monitors and movement, and then, cutting through all of it, like a key turning in a lock, a cry. His cry. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, dark hair, which surprised no one who had met Reginald Whitfield. He arrived with the urgency of a child who had been ready for a while, and after the first stunned moment of his voice filling the room, the first coherent thought Caroline had was not about the divorce, or the injunction, or the DNA evidence, or any of the machinery she had spent 6 weeks building and maintaining and moving through. It was simply, he's here, he's real, he's mine. She held him against her chest, and the room continued its necessary business around her. Delia was crying with the openness of someone who had been waiting for a long time to cry about something good. Margot stood at the bedside and held her daughter's hand without speaking, her face doing something private that Caroline would spend years trying to describe and never quite manage. Dr. Prescott paused at the door on her way out. "He's perfect, Caroline," she said. Then, "Your attorney asked us to document the birth particulars carefully, for the legal record, given the circumstances." Caroline nodded. She knew. Everything was evidence now. Even this, even the most ordinary, most extraordinary thing she had ever done in her life was simultaneously a legal event requiring careful documentation. She held her son and let that be what it was. Reg was notified through Fletcher's office. As required by the court, he sent flowers. An enormous arrangement of white lilies and roses. Hothouse perfect. The kind of arrangement that cost money and said nothing. The kind that was designed to be noted. Delia saw them arrive. She took one look. She picked them up and put them directly in the hallway outside the room. "No," she said simply. Caroline laughed. It was the first time she had laughed since the night in the foyer. The specific, surprised, involuntary laugh of something genuinely funny, happening in the middle of something genuinely terrible. It felt like breathing. The hospital room in those first 2 days was both the smallest and the largest space Caroline had ever occupied. Small because it contained everything that mattered. Large because the world outside had stopped being able to reach her there in any way that counted. At 2 a.m, Noah needed to eat. Caroline sat up in the hospital bed in the blue light from the window and held her son and fed him in the specific, silent intimacy of a mother and a newborn at 2 a.m, when the hospital hallway is quiet and the world is asleep and there is nothing in existence except this small warm weight and his small serious face and the window light and the feeling of something so new it has not yet acquired language. She counted his fingers for the 4th time, not because she didn't know they were all there, because she needed the physical reality of them. Delia was in the chair in the corner. She had been there since 11. She had fallen mostly asleep with a magazine open on her lap. She opened her eyes. "You know what I kept thinking," Delia said quietly, so as not to disturb the particular quality of the 2 a.m. The whole time you were married to him. Every dinner, every event. Every time I watched him work a room and watched you be gracious beside him and be completely invisible at the same time. She paused. "I kept thinking, she is so much smarter than this situation." Caroline looked at her oldest friend in the chair. "And I never said it," Delia said. "And I'm sorry I never said it." "Delia, yes. I needed to figure it out myself," Caroline said. "But I'm glad you see it now." The settlement conference happened 6 days after Noah was born. Caroline participated by video from her mother's living room. Noah was asleep in a carrier on her chest. She had done this deliberately, not as theater, as a statement of what actually existed in the world, which was that she had a son who was real and present and required the same quality of attention that the settlement terms required, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. Fletcher walked her through the offer beforehand, her share of the marital estate, a significant portion, an assessed portion of the Whitfield Properties holdings accumulated during the marriage period. Noah's support, structured through age 18 and into college, with specific provisions, and a confidentiality provision. A confidentiality provision that Reg's team clearly wanted very badly. "He wants quiet," Caroline said. "Yes," Fletcher said. "He's not getting it," she said. The counter-offer they submitted removed the confidentiality provision entirely. In its place was a clause requiring Reg to acknowledge in writing, formally, notarized, filed with the court, that the paternity accusation had been false and had been made with full knowledge that he was Noah's biological father. Fletcher told her this was a long shot. She told him to send it. "Caroline," he said, "he may refuse and take this to trial." "Then we go to trial," she said. Noah shifted against her chest, his small weight warm and definite. "Send it," she said. "I deserved better than this. I always deserved better than this. And now I know what better looks like, and I am building it." Reginald Whitfield signed the counteroffer on a Friday morning, 11 days after it was submitted, 11 days during which Caroline existed in the suspended animation of waiting. She moved through the careful rhythms of new motherhood. The feedings at 2 and 5 in the morning, the weight of a sleeping infant on her chest while she sat in Margot's kitchen in the early light and drank coffee she barely tasted. The specific animal exhaustion of a body that had just done an enormous thing and was still doing an enormous thing and was not going to rest for a long time. She was tired. She was more awake than she had ever been in her life. The answer came on a Friday morning through Fletcher's office. He called at 9:47. He signed, Fletcher said. She was sitting on Margot's back porch with Noah asleep in the carrier against her chest, the December sun on the yard, the neighbor's mesquite tree at the fence line catching the morning light. "He signed everything?" she said. "Everything, including the acknowledgement." She asked Fletcher to read it to her. He read, "Reginald Whitfield states that the assertion of non-paternity made in the preliminary divorce filing was factually incorrect and was made with full knowledge of available DNA evidence indicating otherwise." 17 words of legal language that would exist in the public court record for as long as the record existed. "Okay," Caroline said. "That's all?" Fletcher said. "That's all," she said. She sat on the porch for a while after that call. Noah breathed against her chest. The mesquite tree moved in the small morning wind. The sun was pale and patient and completely without agenda. She did not feel triumphant. She felt something quieter than triumph, something more like the feeling of a weight set down after a very long carry. Not euphoria, not even relief exactly, more like the return of something that had been missing for a long time. Her own weight, back in her own hands. I used to think justice meant his suffering matching mine, that I'd only feel whole again if I could watch him lose everything he made me lose. That's not it. What I needed was the truth to exist somewhere, to be on record, to be real. I have that now. That's enough. The Meridian Holdings irregularities, now a matter of public court record through the fraudulent transfer proceedings, attracted the attention of the Arizona State Corporation Commission within 3 weeks of the settlement. Caroline had not called anyone. She had not spoken to reporters. She had not written statements or leaked documents or orchestrated any kind of exposure. She had simply allowed the facts to be facts. And facts, once they exist in the public record, do not require assistance. Warren Tate cooperated fully with the Commission's investigation. He did this, he said later in an interview, with a Phoenix business publication, because it was time, because 19 years was long enough to be useful to something he did not fully believe in, because when he was young, he had made certain accommodations to ambition that he had spent the subsequent decades slowly paying for, and he was done paying. The investigation moved through the standard stages of such investigations. Methodical, procedural, unglamorous. The collapse of Whitfield Properties happened in stages over 3 months. No perp walk, no single devastating headline. The bureaucratic unwinding of something built on paper that had always been slightly more paper than substance. Reg did not go to prison. He lost the empire. Not technically, not entirely, not all at once, but the story collapsed. The self-made man narrative, the civic benefactor identity, the dinner party version of himself that he had been carefully maintaining for 30 years, the Scottsdale social architecture that had been built around his name and his company and his carefully managed reputation. It did not fall overnight, but it became complicated, and for a man whose empire had always been built on a particular version of himself, complicated was a kind of ruin he could not recover from. Sutton called in January. He was in Phoenix, working on the independent development company he had been quietly preparing for the past 2 years. He asked if Caroline would consider consulting. He needed someone with her financial analysis background. He knew she was thinking about what came next professionally. He asked carefully, with the specific care of someone who understood that the offer carried complicated weight. "I'll think about it," she said. "How's Noah?" She looked across Margot's living room at her son in the bassinet beside the couch, his face doing the complicated private business of infant sleep. "He's extraordinary," she said. "I believe it," Sutton said. Toward the end of January, a card arrived in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. The envelope had a Flagstaff postmark. Inside, 2 sentences in a handwriting Caroline recognized. "You held your dignity." That mattered to more people than you know. She sat with the card for a long time. She thought about Patricia Ellerman Whitfield in her house in Flagstaff, in the house she owned outright and had purchased with money she fought for, living her life in the clean air 3,000 feet above sea level, having made it to the other side, and reaching back to say, "I see you. You made it too." She put the card on her mother's windowsill, beside the vanilla candle. Somewhere along the way, I became invisible. Not to them, to myself. I am becoming visible again. To myself first. That is where it has to start. Fletcher called in late January to let her know the financial settlement had been fully processed. The numbers he cited were the numbers she had earned, not a windfall, not compensation for the grief, but her fair portion of a life she had participated in building, which was what she had always been entitled to, and which had been briefly, unsuccessfully, attempted to be taken from her. She thanked him. She asked about his fee. He named a figure. She wired it the same day because she had been a financial analyst, and she understood the value of clean transactions and people who showed up when it mattered. It was March. 14 weeks since Noah was born. 10 weeks since the settlement was signed. 7 weeks since the Arizona State Corporation Commission had opened its investigation into Meridian Holdings. 3 weeks since Caroline had signed the lease on her apartment. The apartment was on the east side of Scottsdale. 2 bedrooms, good light, clean lines. The second bedroom she had painted herself on a Saturday afternoon in February, with Delia on a stepladder and Noah in a bouncy seat on the drop cloth, watching them with the grave attention of a person observing important work. She had painted it pale yellow. She had always loved yellow. She had lived for 4 years in a house decorated in Reg's palette of gray and chrome and deliberate restraint. She had adapted her preferences to his aesthetics the way she had adapted other things, quietly, gradually, without noticing the accumulation. The yellow was for Noah. It was also for herself. She sat on the apartment's small porch most evenings. The porch was barely large enough for 2 chairs and a planter she had filled with rosemary because she liked the smell of rosemary. There was a view of the neighbor's enormous mesquite tree that turned gold in the afternoon light. She had not known about the mesquite tree when she signed the lease. It felt like a gift she hadn't known to ask for. She had 3 consulting clients now, small development firms. None of them were Sutton's. She had decided to keep that as a future option rather than a present one, because she wanted to establish her own foundation first. She was good at the work. She had always been good at the work. 8 years of financial analysis before the marriage had not diminished. It had, she was discovering, actually sharpened during the marriage, in the same way that senses sometimes sharpen in the dark. She could see what other people missed in numbers. She always could. Now she was being paid well to do it for herself. Delia came on Thursday evenings. They cooked things that took time, 1 glass of wine each, long conversations that ranged across everything and landed, increasingly, not on Reg, but on other things. Delia's relationship with the kind, slightly boring man who was turning out to be exactly what she needed. Caroline's client work. Noah's developing opinions about the specific sounds that were acceptable and the specific sounds that were not. Margot came on Sundays. The relationship between them had entered a new register since Noah, a horizontal quality, a shared understanding of something that cannot be explained to anyone who has not lived it. They cooked Sunday dinners together, and Margot held Noah with the specific ease of a grandmother who has found her purpose again, and they talked the way women talk when they have stopped managing each other and simply become honest. The mirror moment came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Caroline had gone to the grocery store, a regular errand, the ordinary logistics of a life. She had strapped Noah into his car seat, driven the 4 minutes to the store, done the shopping, loaded the bags into the trunk, returned to the driver's seat. Noah had fallen asleep on the drive over. He was still asleep, his small face completely peaceful, his mouth slightly open. The afternoon sun was coming through the windshield at a particular angle and doing something beautiful with the dust in the air. The parking lot hummed its ordinary parking lot hum. She did not start the car. She sat in the driver's seat with her hands in her lap and let the moment be what it was. Not because she couldn't move, not because she was paralyzed, because she was full, because the moment was good, because she was learning the difference between waiting to escape a moment and choosing to stay inside one. She sat there for 5 minutes. Noah breathed. The afternoon light moved slightly as a cloud went across the sun and came back. Someone pushed a cart across the parking lot, and the wheels made their small rhythmic sound on the pavement. She started the car. She drove home. She thought about the night in the foyer. She did this sometimes now, not with the same weight, not with the clinched quality it used to have. When thinking about it meant going back inside it. She thought about it the way you think about something that happened to you that you have finally gotten far enough from to see completely. She thought about what she had taken on the way out. Phone, purse, baby name book. She thought about why she had taken the baby name book. She understood it now in a way she hadn't that night. She took it because some part of her already knew. Not consciously, not strategically, not with any kind of plan, but in the deep part of herself that the 4 years had not managed to reach. She had known that Noah was still going to be Noah, that the name was hers before it was theirs, that the version of herself she needed to keep was the one that had chosen that name. In the first month of the separation, she had briefly considered changing it, giving Noah something untouched, something that hadn't lived inside the marriage. She had considered it for about 3 days. Then she had decided. The name was hers before it was theirs. It stays. He thought he was throwing me out of his life. He was, but he was also throwing me back into mine. And I had genuinely forgotten. I had spent 4 years forgetting how much I liked myself before I learned to be careful in his house. She put Noah to bed at 7:30 that evening with the specific ritual they had developed over 14 weeks. The white noise machine, the dim yellow light, the song she had been singing him since the hospital, which was a song her father had sung to her and which she had not thought about in years until the night Noah was born, and it arrived in her mouth fully formed, as if it had been waiting. She sang it, and he went still in that particular way of infants falling asleep. She stood in the doorway of the yellow bedroom for a moment, then she went to her own room and sat on the edge of her bed and looked at her life, not with crisis, not with grief, with the clear-eyed attention of someone taking genuine stock. She was 31 years old. She had a son who was extraordinary. She had a financial analysis career that was already rebuilding faster than she had expected. She had a mother and a best friend who had shown up completely and without condition. She had a small porch with a rosemary planter and a view of a mesquite tree that turned gold in the afternoon. She had, somewhere in the space between that open door and this apartment, found something she had not known she had lost. The wisdom that had been building for 14 weeks arrived that night not as a revelation, but as a settling, the quiet click of something finding its proper place. She finally understood what she needed to understand, not about Reg, about herself, what had happened to her. The 4 years of careful management and slow adjustment and the gradual erosion of her own perceptions, none of it had happened because she was naive or unworthy of better. It had happened because she was human, because humans in love make optimistic calculations, because the story of a man who chooses you out of everyone is a compelling story, and she had believed it with her whole self. That was not failure. That was being alive, and what she carried out, the other side of it, was not bitterness, and it was not hardness, and it was not the specific closed-off quality of someone who had learned that love was not to be trusted. It was literacy. She could read the story now. She knew what the red ink looked like. She would not mistake it for black again, and she would love again. She was certain of that. Not because the certainty was comfortable, but because it was true. She was 31 years old, and she was a complete person, and she was not going to let one man's architecture define the rest of her structure. But not yet. First, this porch, this rosemary, this yellow bedroom, this sun, this self, being retrieved from where it had been stored. First, herself. Noah woke at 5:47 in the morning on a Wednesday in March. He announced his wakefulness with the absolute confidence of someone for whom morning was a personal achievement, a sustained announcement, joyful and non-negotiable. Carolyn was already half awake. She had been half awake since 5, doing the specific early morning cataloging of the day ahead that had replaced the specific early morning dread of the past year. The dread was gone. What replaced it was not exactly peace. It was something more active, more like readiness. She lifted him from the bassinet. He was warm and slightly damp, and immediately interested in the morning. She carried him to the porch. The desert morning light was pink and gold and thin. The mesquite tree at the neighbor's fence was doing its best work of the day, catching the first real light and holding it. The air was cool. In another hour it would be warm. She sat in the porch chair with Noah on her lap and let the morning be the morning. He looked up at her. Infants of 14 weeks have faces that are still doing the tremendous work of becoming themselves. Noah's face was at once entirely new and entirely familiar. She had been memorizing it for 14 weeks, and she was not done. He looked up at her with the specific ancient gravity, doas soajai, of new infants who are paying very close attention to a world they have just arrived in us. Noah, she said, just his name, just to hear it. He considered this. Then he smiled, the full, unguarded, completely specific smile of a 14-week-old who has decided that the morning and the light and the person holding him are all acceptable. He had her eyes. She had not noticed until this moment, or she had noticed and not let herself fully receive it. But looking at him in the pink March morning light, she saw it clearly for the first time. He had her eyes, completely and unmistakably hers. Something happened in her chest that she did not have a word for. Something that was joy and grief and gratitude and the particular overwhelming quality of a love that you did not know was possible until it arrived. She laughed. Not at anything. Not because anything was funny, because it was too much to hold in any other way. The beauty of this morning, and this child, and this life that was entirely and only hers. Noah, startled by the laugh, looked at her with great seriousness. Then he laughed too. The small, surprised, involuntary laugh of a baby discovering that sound can be made in response to sound. That this is a thing that can happen between people. The mesquite tree caught the first gold of the real morning light. The city beyond the apartment began its daily noise. Caroline Whitfield sat on her small porch with her extraordinary son in her lap and laughed in the March morning and felt, fully and without qualification, the thing she had been working toward since the night she walked out of that foyer with 3 things in her hands. Solid ground. She had walked out of that house carrying a phone and a purse and a baby name book. She had lost 1 marriage. She had found 1 son. And somewhere in the long space between that open door and this porch, in the offices of attorneys and the kitchens of mothers, and the 3 in the morning feedings, and the documents filed, and the documents signed, and the empire unwinding in the public record and the card from Flagstaff, and the yellow paint on the bedroom wall, she had found something else. Quietly. Unexpectedly. The way the most permanent discoveries always arrive. Herself. Not a new version, not a better version, not the version rebuilt from the ruins of someone else's design. The original one. The one who had always known what she was worth. The one who had chosen the name Noah in the first place. The one who sat in parked cars and breathed and then drove. The one who counted broken glass and reorganized linen closets and watched fish in law office waiting rooms and carried a baby name book out of a burning building because some part of her had always known that the name and the child and the life were hers to keep. The mesquite tree turned gold. Noah laughed. And Caroline Whitfield, 31 years old, sitting in the pale March light of a life that was entirely and only and completely hers, laughed too. Closing credit, this content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaningful stories and real-life lessons worth sharing.